Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be the third video in our React 2021 course. Again, if you want to be part of the community and be able to like say hi and stuff, you can always reach me on the Dev Nursery Slack community or the Dev Nursery Discord community. I'm on both all the time, so whichever one you prefer. There's different people on both. Get to know them. Always good to network. But with that, where we left off is we did in the first video, we kind of discussed like what is a React component and how to build a React component. In the second video, we discussed props and a parent component passing data to a child component. But again, the idea there is that the component is receiving, what changes the component is data from the outside. Now we need to talk about how does a component change based on data on the inside. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create a, I'm going to get rid of all the components I have now. So I'm going to head over to app and just clear this out again. Boop. Okay, and I'm going to create a new component called color switcher. New file. Okay, and I'm just going to copy the stuff from footer. It's a quick way to set this up. New file, color switcher. .js. So I'm going to create a new component called color switcher. So let me just set this all up. So we just, so again, all a component is a function that returns JSX. Okay, and this is just going to be a div. Okay, so what's going to happen is the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a div. Okay, we're going to have a div. Let's style that div. I'm going to use inline styles just to keep it all in the file. And this div is going to have a border, is going to have a width of 200 pixels, a height of 200 pixels, and a border of 3 pixels solid black. Okay, and then let me actually refresh I have to start the server. So the server's not running currently because again I pushed the code between videos. So let me go do that. npm start, so we can kind of, right now it's just gonna be a blank page because I haven't actually used this component yet. Which actually, let me just do that real quick. Let me just take this component, import it, color switcher. Does it not recognize it? Did I not export? Color switcher. Oh, I wrote color. So I want to call this color switcher. Now I'll go back to app, import color switcher. Thank you VS Code for making that easy. And now I can use this color switcher component. And notice I'm not passing it any props, so I'll actually delete this line over here. Okay, oops, too much deleting there. So I'm going to head back to color switcher. So right now you see this div is forming in the block. Let me just center this div by giving it some margin. So it's going to be auto. That should center the block. Okay, cool. So now state are essentially variables that exist inside. They're created inside the component. So they don't come from the outside like props. Okay, but what makes them different is, imagine this. Like, it's just to show you sort of what's the problem if I don't use state. So I'm going to say that we're going to create a variable called the color. Okay, so I'm going to say let color, so we can change the variable. Let color equal green. Okay, and then I'm going to say that the color, the background color of this block, background color will equal whatever the color variable equals. Okay, so we have a green block, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 3 buttons. Okay, one for orange, and then we'll also create one for red and blue. Okay, and what we can do is that a button, the way you could have like trigger a click event. So let's say we want these buttons to click. Okay, we want them to, when I click on something, something happens. Okay, And actually, I'm going to wrap these in a div too. The reason why is I want to center these buttons. So I'm going to Control X, put this div around here. And again, all of this is still wrapped inside this outer div. Okay, so there's still only one div at the top. But I'm going to style this div. Style equals curly brackets, text align, center. Okay, and then let me give it some margin so that way it's not so nestled up against the block. Margin 20 pixels. Okay, cool. That looks a lot better. And let me just save this so that way it kind of organizes the contents of this component. And let me just move this down so we can get the extra space. Okay, so I got these three buttons. And what I want to do is I want to make it when I click on the orange button that it's going to change that color variable to orange. When I change it to click on red, it changes it to red. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I can add an event. Normally in HTML, I would just write on click and then I can say equals and then I write some JavaScript directive, like I run this function or whatever. Again, this is not HTML though, this is JSX. So in JSX, what I can do is I can do on click, but camel case. And same thing for all the other events, on click, on double click, on all these things. Again, you can see the whole list here. So like on, so you can see like all the events, but you see they're all camel case. Okay, lots of events. But in this case, I'm gonna do on click. And then I do equals, but I pass the function that's gonna run in curly brackets. Okay, because again, I'm escaping and I'm passing it a JavaScript value. I'm not passing it a string like in HTML. So I pass it on click. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write an arrow function right in here. So I'm just going to literally define the function in line. So now whenever I click this button, it's going to run this function. But again, what I wanted to do in this function was a few things. I wanted to change color to, I want to change color equals, and what do I want to color to? Orange. And then I want to console log it just to prove that we changed it. Console.log color. Okay, and before I do the other two buttons, let's just see what happens. So I'm going to open up my console. So theoretically, what I would assume if I didn't already know React, my assumption would be when I click this button, it should change that variable to color to orange, which should then make this orange, and then this box should change orange. Okay, now if I click orange, it did change. So look, see, like the value of color is orange. Like it got console logged and it came out as orange. But the block did not change. Now the reason this is just because of the variable changes, React does not rerun the function. So this function that generates this JSX is not running again. It only runs again in one situation. If a special variable that we designate as state changes. And then it doesn't necessarily even change it. Technically what it does is it destroys everything that's on the screen or destroys that component from the screen and then reruns the function and puts the new output with the new value up on the board. So you're not really changing the value of the variable in the current scope. You're disposing of the current scope and creating a new one with the changed values. You're running the function again. But just the reason I'm being very technical about that is because a lot of the trouble that people have with React is in this particular area in general, because it takes a while to really appreciate the distinction between am I changing the value versus am I really updating the value in a new context. And there's going to be a lot of little edge cases in React where that's going to that understanding is going to play a role in troubleshooting. Like a lot of the basic stuff, it won't. Like once you just change it, basically update the variable and things change. But there'll be a lot of context where understanding that nuance, where technically what I'm doing is I'm passing the new value to the next run of this component instead of necessarily changing the value in the current context, matters. Okay, but yeah. So how do I create this state then? How do I make this variable in a way that it recognizes that when it changes it should update? Now, unfortunately, this is not Svelte. In Svelte, this would be enough. I declare the variable when it changes, my UI updates. Love Svelte for that. But it's not too bad. Okay, what you do is we have to import this function called useState from React. Okay, this will probably be, anytime you see like these functions that start with the word use, these are referred to as hooks. Okay, these are called hooks. And of all the hooks, this is the most used one. It's the one you're going to use the most by far. And what it does is going to create a variable that is reactive, meaning when it changes, the UI will update. We will update the JSX for the new values. Okay. Now a couple rules regarding hooks. Hooks have to be used in a function component, which again I haven't mentioned that there's a thing called class components because they're not really used anymore as much, if at all, for newer applications. But so I would have to use it in the function. I can't use it outside of the function. I can't use it in a conditional. The reason is the hooks, every time the component re-renders, every time it updates, it has to run all those hooks in the same order for it to work. Okay, it has just to do with some of the magic under the hood in React. So in that case, I can't have like hooks that may or may not run, or run. So it can't run conditionally, because then there's a chance that you may not have the exact same number of hooks, and that would cause a problem between renders. So you always have to think about how can I use my hooks. The hooks themselves cannot be used in a loop. Generally, there's definitely ways around, like ways where you can get the result you want, but you have to kind of think about how can I do that with a fixed number of hook usages of hooks. Typically what you can do is you can have a sub-component, and then you can conditionally render components. So in that case, you can render many components that each have a hook inside of them, and that's kind of the way you get around that. Okay, so now that I've kind of introduced what a hook is, let's actually use it. Let me refactor this variable so that way it is state. So if I want this to work, what I would do is I would then first wrap this in square brackets. Technically, this feature that I'm taking advantage of is called destructuring. It's a JavaScript feature, destructuring. I do have videos on it if you ever want to see how array and object destructuring work. I have several videos on this topic. I would refer you to one of those to really kind of appreciate what's happening here. I'll give you a brief synopsis. But basically what I would do is I would use the state function and pass it green. And what this is doing is that it's creating a new variable whose value is green. That's going to get stored here. And then I'm creating a function that allows me to update that value. So again, I have to update it, and then if the updated value is different than the original value, the component rebuilds itself. So now what I would do is instead of saying color equals orange, I would say set color to orange. Okay, and now this should work. Now if I click the orange button, I'm going to get rid of this console log because that's going to end up console log. And again, this is one of those things. Actually, I'll leave the console log for a moment just to illustrate my point. Okay, look what happens. I'm going to refresh. Now watch what happens in the terminal. I'm going to click orange. The block changes to orange, but what did we console log? Green, because I didn't change the variable. In the context in which this function ran was in the original version of the component. And there, it's still green. But again, what it did is it removed that version of the component and created a new version where now color is orange. But that console log happened in the context of the old version of the component, so that's why it's still console log green. So that's why sometimes console logs, when you're updating state, can be really, really misleading. So then how am I supposed to check, did the state change? This is where DevTools becomes really useful. Because if I go to the color switcher, I can see the state in here. So if I refresh, I can see that the state is currently green. If I click the orange button, and I can see it changes to orange. And that's going to be a much more accurate way for me to tell if one, is the state changing, and is it changing to the correct values. So your DevTools are going to be something you're going to really want to lean on when you're doing React development. Same goes for the other frameworks. They generally all have their own DevTools terminal that does a very similar thing. Okay, so just to run through one more time what's happening, if I refresh, again, when the page loads, this function runs. And then what it displays is the output of the return value. And on this run, the initial run of the component, the value of color is green. So in that case, when background color here shows up, this is going to end up being green. Now when I click the orange button, this function triggers, and that's going to end up setting the state for the next render to be orange. So this color variable will be orange on the next go around. So I hit orange, this function runs again. Okay, and now on the second go around, the state is going to be orange. And that's just to kind of demonstrate this. Let's do a console log. Okay, I'm going to do 2 console logs. just to really kind of illustrate this function is running multiple times. Console log, the component has rendered. And actually I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do another console log after we declare color. Okay, console.log. On this render, the color is color. So I'm going to go to the console. I'm going to hit refresh. Okay, so see the component has rendered once. See the component has rendered. On this render, the color is green. So the component has rendered, and on this initial render, the color is green. Because this function ran, and these lines ran along with the code. Now I hit orange, it's going to update the state, and this function is going to run again, and watch what happens. The console logs have ran, so I updated the state, and this function ran again. So those console logs ran again. The component has rendered. On this render, the color is orange. Okay, so you see on the next time the function ran, the value of that color changed. Okay, so it's basically what's happening is that what you're doing is you're altering the data on the next run of the function, not on the current run of the function. And I know I'm like belaboring this point, but it's like sort of like the most fundamental thing. Like when that clicks, state becomes pretty easy to understand. It's just that sort of piece that is sort of like the thing that needs to click. That's where the learning curve of React is. That piece right there. Once you got that, everything kind of starts falling into place. It's just, okay, this function is running once, then anytime things change, it runs again, and that's life. So now let's set the other two buttons so we can kind of see this in action. So I'm going to just copy this on click because it's going to be the same thing for the other two. So I'll paste it in there, boop, boop, except changing it to red, except I pasted it in the wrong place. Okay, so let me just hit space. Okay, and then let's change this to red. And then let's do it again for the blue button. And then this time it's going to be blue. Okay, so now let's watch what happens. I'll refresh the page. So see, first time it's green. If I click blue, it turns blue, and see, like on this render, the color is blue. So every time I change the state, the component is rendering. This function's rerunning, which means these console logs run again. Then I hit red. Then I hit orange. Okay, and you see, like each time the component has rendered. On this render, the color is blue. Okay, easy peasy. Okay, and that's it. That's all there is to state. Okay, it's just essentially I declare a variable like this that generally has some sort of relationship to what's going to end up visually being represented on the screen. Whenever that variable changes, which I have to do using this set function, and again, the naming of these things are arbitrary. I could call this cheese, I can call this bread, it doesn't matter, but the convention always is the first is the variable name, and then the second thing is the set variable name, because you want to update the value. And then this, when this gets updated, it updates what you see, because the function's running again, and in that second run, that value is different, so the results are different. Okay, so that's all there is to it. That's it. That's state. Okay, cool. And then that state can be passed to other components as props, so you can do that. And you can pass functions that update this component state to another component as props, so that way that other component can use the function and update that component state. There's a lot of cool things you can do here. But that state, I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, I'm going to let you play. Things I would recommend trying to build to get used to state is one, build this color square thing so you can kind of see it. Build a counter. Build where you push a button and the number counts from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. Build a to-do list. These little mini types of applications, they're really simple, but they are really going to help you like understand what's going on with state, because they're simple enough that you can just focus on the idea and not get bogged down in all these other sort of complicating factors. Okay, so oftentimes the simplest things are going to be the things where things are going to click the most, because you're not distracted by like a whole bunch of CSS and a bunch of other features that are going on, a bunch of functions. It's just like that, you're just updating state. So a counter, a to-do list, again, this just sort of color swapper, switcher thing. Try one of those and go from there. I'll see you in the next video. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to iterate JSX. Like I have an array of data and I want to show it on the screen. How do I do that? I will do that on the next screen. So I'm going to push this code up. So let's do that. Pushy, and again, pushy is a custom script I made on my computer, so don't try that. Don't try it at home. If you watch my bash scripting videos, I can show you how to make that particular script. But you know, we'll just say state origin state. So that's been uploaded to that branch. Then I'm going to do a git checkout -b, make another branch for the next video, and the next video will be going over map, which is how we'll iterate over, or generally how you'll iterate over DOM elements. Okay, so with that, I will see you all in the next video.